What up, bro? It's your boy Mac Mizzle, the host, but the most don't need to brag no more. So all I do is give a toast to the real folks and pave the way in the real way for us players to play. Yeah, man, you know what I'm saying? It's better late than never, you know? It's supposed to start at 11, but yeah, you know, I'm here. I'm here. What up, fam? I'm here to talk to y'all about this explaining out here, you know what I'm saying? Too many of us are caught up in the gimmicks, you know what I'm saying? And when it comes time to really break down the situations, sometimes shit gets lost in translation. Cause you gotta break it down in a certain way where it's like you see what's going on, you peep the game, and you find a way to minimize conflict, so to speak, but also get a point across that we're being duped, we're being had, and hoodwinked, led astray, run amok. You know? This whole election thing, everything that's going on in the world, you know. We really gotta ask ourselves, man, what's going on out here, man? I reutilize every possible avenue to its fullest potential. You know, you got a lot of bullshit going on in the world. A lot of people getting put into compromising positions. You know? So now that the elections are done, and it seems like the majority of black folks are happy about the outcome. And what's what's next? You know, what did we expect to get out of it? You know? What's our agenda? You know what I'm saying? So that's the questions I gotta ask. And then you got a whole bunch of niggas screaming, which that's what it is, you know? People will be like, well, yeah, we have to get Trump out. He's the worst white supremacist. You got the Proud Boys out fighting for everything, you know what I'm saying? What is Tropicana? That feeling 100% pure. You got this, you got that. And I'm sitting back and I'm just looking at it. I'm like, it's funny because yeah, shit is crazy. So now we reach a whole another level of this thing we call critical thinking. Yeah, shout out Black Rose, you know what I'm saying? Y'all remember, in the summertime we did the first annual Black Rose barbecue basketball tournament. It was off the hook, off the chain, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, we got the whole hood out. You know what I'm saying? Doing it like that, keeping it for real in the field. You know what I'm saying? So what I really want to break down is like, how far are we gonna take this? Man? You know what I'm saying? We can't just be out here niggas explaining and saying, oh, things are just gonna get better. We just gotta go with the flow. You know what I'm saying? And go back to the old racism, which is sly and not so in your face. More covert and out of place. Nah, I ain't going for it. And the fact of the matter is, we shouldn't be out here trying to lie to ourselves, you know what I'm saying? Or convince our people otherwise, You know what I mean? It should be, if I shine, you shine. Nothing more, nothing less, Got folks out here grieving over things that's going on in the world, That's why a lot of things go down, because we're not taking it into consideration, or the ancestors think. Me selling out over here, I'm not critically thinking about this over here, not seeing it from a right perspective, like a warrior should, You're not gonna get nothing handed to you. Knowing that the history of the people that put you in these predicaments, it just doesn't compute. It doesn't equate. It doesn't relate to what's really the reality of things, And put it all into perspective. So let me just break something down real quick. There was a show in by Dane Calloway, and he had a very insightful breakdown of the breach of the civil rights movement. So I wanted to see what that was all about. At the same time, we could discuss what's going on and how far we've kind of came, Y'all just listening, and we're going to talk about it. To watch my exclusive content not featured anywhere on YouTube, log on to my website at imjustheretomakeyoutthink.com/films. Oh, you got baby stuff in the way and all that. Your boy's a proud father. Got babies in the house. So when we talk about the breach of the civil rights movement and everything that went down, there's no room for no more nigga spinning. It's 2020. Our ancestors, our elders went through a whole lot to become free, to become respected in this nation. And they deserve to be heard. They deserve to be honored by us carrying on the legacy. So all this nigga explaining about, we gotta follow the Democrats because they have a trickle-down economy where it's going to benefit us through socioeconomic programs that help the disenfranchised capitalize over the decades of come on, man, it's bullshit. But listen in though. I want y'all to listen to this.
My father's a Black Panther. My mother got arrested for the sit-ins at age 6. They were fighting for us to have the right to our opinion, not the right to vote for whoever the white liberals said Black people are supposed to vote for. You know what I'm saying? And then James Corden went in and said, "But this president, you're a Christian, and this president, I don't see anything Christian about him." I said, okay, so last year y'all tried to tell me who I'm supposed to vote for because I'm Black. Now this year, white liberals trying to tell me who I'm supposed to vote for because I'm Christian. That would be like I live in Calabasas, so every one of my cars can be a convertible. It's just all based on y'all vision of what I'm supposed to do.
What is it that you wanted me to reconcile myself to? I was born here almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time. It's taking my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brothers and my sisters' time, my nieces and my nephews' time. How much time do you want? Or your progress? Or your progress?
CEO, everyone. So I take it that you are well versed on what part one of this segment has to offer. And all of what I'm pointing out here during this time period is very essential to note when it comes to understanding why the so-called Black vote has been discounted and undermined to the point where if the Negro shall decide to even go and register to vote under their own will, then there's a strong possibility that they may be evicted from their own lands and could possibly face losing their only means to make an income that allows them to provide for their families and maintain their farms. So let us
back at it.
Where we left off in
Sorry, y'all had to.
Where it was from this June 6, 1966, James Meredith precedent that provoked a young, aspiring civil rights activist by the name of Stokely Carmichael to finally have his opportunity to shine in the political spotlight on a national level. Stokely Standiford Churchill Carmichael was born June 29, 1941, in Port of Spain, Trinidad. He immigrated to the U.S. in 1952 at the age of 11, where he briefly resided in Harlem, New York, with both of his parents until they moved to Van Ness in East Bronx, New York, which was predominantly an Italian and Jewish immigrant neighborhood at that time. What is very important to note here is that Stokely Carmichael was a member of the Morris Park Dukes gang in East Bronx, New York, in which he was the only person of color accepted into this organized crime-related street gang. Keep in mind that this was at a time period where you may believe that racism ran rapid throughout America, and so-called whites would be furiously opposed to working with so-called blacks in collaboration efforts. However, truthful history continues to prove otherwise. Many people that shared various shades of the color brown and skin complexion did not share the same life experiences as some others may have in most southern and northern states of America. And like millions of others, Stokely was one of those children. And we can all agree that racism is not something that you are born with. Racism has to be taught to an individual. So, without a doubt, now you know that it works both ways. In fact, it wasn't until Stokely's very first year of attending Howard University as a student in 1961 that he became aware of segregation and racial discrimination, sparking his interest in studying the already active civil rights movement with a few of his fellow classmates, undergoing discovery of all tricks of the trade. Stokely eventually joined the Nonviolence Action Group, which was the Howard campus affiliate of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC for short, where he studied under the guise of various other students of particular colleges and universities, like Diane Nash, for example, who also didn't experience racism during her childhood until she later became a college student.
I had never traveled to the South at that time, and I didn't have an emotional relationship to segregation. It's, I understood the facts and the stories, but there was not the emotional relationship. When I actually went south and actually saw signs that said white and colored, and I actually could not drink out of that water fountain or go to that ladies' room, I had a real emotional reaction to that.
Diane Nash is one of the co-founders of SNCC, and she was also involved in the field operations of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, whereas Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was its president and also one of the prominent leading influencers of the civil rights movement already underway. Then 21-year-old Stokely Carmichael grew to have a different approach to tackling various politically driven issues of concern, in which many of these ways were looked down upon by his fellow colleagues who disagreed with disengaging from being moral supporters of nonviolence and loyalists to Dr. King. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was founded by a few young college students, like then 22-year-old Diane Nash of Howard University, and then 25-year-old Charles Frederick McDough of South Carolina State University, joining with then 57-year-old Ella Josephine Baker of Shaw University, just to name a few, in April of the year 1960. Together, they all nominated then 24-year-old Marion Berry of Fisk University to become the committee's very first chairman. And then the very next year, Berry was replaced by Charles McDough himself in 1961. And McDough held the chairman position until stepping down 2 years later. And then 23-year-old John Robert Lewis was elected chairman of SNCC in 1963. Now, by this time period, members of SNCC found themselves becoming victims of their own demise when it came to firm mutual agreements on various causes of some high-profile concerns within their own student committees. One of these concerns was that many of the students found themselves at odds with the old nonviolent approach that was heavily publicly promoted by various so-called black leaders, with Dr. King leading the charge. On the part of SNCC's involvement within these disagreements, they were mainly discussed, debated, and manifested by Stokely Carmichael himself, who was a field organizer of SNCC during this time period in 1963. In 1964, John Lewis was then forcefully removed as the chairman of SNCC due to Stokely Carmichael and his direct peers' disagreement with practicing nonviolence rather than self-defense, and the fact that John Lewis was too close of a friend to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So, the majority of SNCC members decided that Lewis should turn his back against Dr. King and his agenda.
Stokely Carmichael had you removed as the chairman of that committee. Why? Called SNCC.
It was called SNCC. It was called SNCC. Short, I guess, for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee of the press was
Stokely said, yo, man, John Lewis.
On the board of Stokely, Carmichael, and some other.
Moving too right,
that I was too close to Martin Luther King Jr., that I was too committed to the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. They didn't think I was militant enough or radical enough. They wanted me to take on Martin Luther King Jr., take on Lyndon Johnson as president. And I disagreed with President Johnson on many things, but I was not going to get in a name-calling process or thing with
Lyndon Johnson. With Dr. King. Dr. King was my friend. I was on his board, the board of SDLC. He was my leader. He was my hero. And I accepted the role as a participant. I didn't see myself as some great leader. I saw myself as one of the participants in the civil rights movement.
After successfully removing John Lewis as chairman, Stokely Carmichael was then elected as the new chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1964 at the age of 23. And as you can tell by John Lewis's own account here, there was a lot of tension between the college students of SNCC and SCLC and many other parties involved that I'll get into more detail here soon enough. Once Stokely became the chairman of SNCC in 1964, he quickly realized that he needed to stick with Dr. King and his political motives, agendas, and participation in various precedents that Dr. King involved himself in, all just to gain the attention of Dr. King's viewers, listeners, supporters, and media presence. And here's what I mean by that. Just as well as the other college students who participated in the civil rights organizations they created, Stokely Carmichael was one of those college students who participated with influencing numerous people of color to go and register to vote. And he was also determined to be the very first person to popularize the phrase Black Power on national media by sticking to Dr. King's side in particular whenever the media is present. And he casually speaks in response to Dr. King on most occasions, standing against Dr. King's beliefs, pledges, opinions, and his overall agenda. Upon close examination of Dr. King's facial expression, we can determine that Stokely was upsetting him, but Dr. King still managed to not lose focus.
What do you mean when you shout Black Power to these people back here?
I mean that they are oppressed because they are black, and their rallying cry must be Black Power, so that they can use that to ensure justice for themselves.
I feel that while believing firmly that power is necessary, that it would be difficult for me to use the phrase Black Power because of the connotative meaning that it has for many people and the feeling that this may represent a desire to rise from a position of disadvantage to one of advantage, thereby subverting justice.
It's important to understand the transition with SNCC. When Stokely became the chairman of SNCC, he had a different approach. He'd not been trained in nonviolence, and he believed in self-defense. And he was somewhat influenced by, Malcolm X, who talked about that, and also Adam Clayton Powell. Adam Clayton Powell talked about Black Power even before Stokely and others.
And it was amazing to me how after long walks he would listen to them vent, listen to all of his events, and it was wonderful to be a fly on the wall with great patience. And I remember him often saying, Stokely, is it that bad? Is it that bad? But he listened, and that was in Black Power first began to emerge. And I will never forget Dr. King's face when in Greenwood we had a rally, and Willie Ricks got up and started saying Black Power. He looked like the most stricken man, but that was the first real breach in the nonviolence commitment.
Mississippi of 1964, Stokely spoke at various student-filled meetings and began soliciting door-to-door within particular neighborhoods of counties heavily populated by low-income residents of Mississippi. So now the question then becomes, to go and vote for what? And to go and vote for who? A portion of that who was known as the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was a newly formed political party of Democrats that consisted of both so-called white and black representatives. And despite being heavily favored publicly by way of visual images of this party, being heavily campaigned by the media to the public. White Democrats of the original Dixiecrats Party, along with Lyndon B. Johnson, became very aggravated and defensive and reacted in a way as if someone intruded upon their privacies of a segregated lifestyle. Then 47-year-old Fannie Lou Hamer of Montgomery County, Mississippi, was chosen to speak at the Democratic National Convention held on August 22nd, 1964, as the vice chairperson of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Ms. Hamer detailed some very vital information to the public that should have alarmed everyone then about the cons of the so-called Negroes' participation in a voting system that they were initially banned from.
Mr. Chairman, and to the credentials committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. It was the 31st of August of 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. And Reverend Jeff Funny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down trying to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, you know, did Cap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. But then if you go down and withdraw, then you still might have to go because we're not ready for that in Mississippi.
Now, this is why it is very essential to know your history of your own family members, because not every county of every state underwent racial discrimination, environmental racism, low-income poverty, nor racial segregation during this time period of the 1960s. Okay? In fact, many of these college students that were members of these various committees didn't experience any of these things as a child growing up and becoming young adults. What you will find is that many of these college students were well-educated followers of various religious faiths, and their parents even disagreed with them attempting to desegregate schools where so-called whites attended, and other public places that so-called Negroes didn't own or were not even a part of. What's also important to note here is that their parents were not struggling to the point where they couldn't afford for their children to gain a higher education. These college students were very well versed in organizing meetings, gathering funds necessary, writing public speeches for members who were speakers, and more importantly, influence members to dare place themselves directly in the way of segregated areas across America, purposely.
I first heard of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1955 when I was 15 years old. I grew up
This is John Lewis speaking.
50 miles from Montgomery. I had seen the signs that said white, colored, white men, colored men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. I heard Dr. King's voice on the radio. His words inspired me. I grew up in segregated rural Alabama, and I didn't like the signs that I saw saying white and colored. White men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. The action of Dr. King inspired me to find a way to get in the way. I had been told by my mother, my father, my grandparents, and great-grandparents, when I would ask questions, they would say, don't get in trouble. Don't get in the way. But I felt like Martin Luther King Jr., was speaking directly to me, saying, John Robert Lewis, you two can do something. So in 1957, at the age of 17, I wrote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. a letter. I didn't tell my mother, my father, any of my sisters, or brothers, or teachers. I wanted to attend a little college 10 miles from my home called Troy State College. I applied to go there, submitted my application, my high school transcript. So I wrote this letter. Dr. King wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come tomorrow to meet with him. So in September 1957, I boarded a bus. I traveled from Troy, Alabama, rural Alabama, past Montgomery, to Nashville to go to school. An uncle of mine gave me $100 bill, more money than I had. Gave me a Foot Locker, put everything
John Lewis.
A few books, a few clothing in that Foot Locker, and took a Greyhound bus to Nashville. If I was there studying, Rosa Parks came to speak at Fisk University, and I heard her. I met her. And Dr. King later heard through one of my teachers that I was in Nashville studying. So Martin Luther King Jr. got back in touch with me and told me when I was home for spring break to come see him. So in March of 1958, by this time I'm 18 years old, I boarded a bus. I traveled from Troy to Montgomery. And a young lawyer by the name of Fred Gray was a lawyer for Rosa Parks, for Dr. King, and the people involved in the Montgomery bus program. Met me at the Greyhound bus station and drove me to the First Baptist Church in downtown Montgomery.
Damn, y'all.
And ushered me into the pastor's study. I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk. I was so scared.
My fault.
What to say or what to do. And Dr. King said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" And I said, "Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis." But he still called me the boy from Troy. And he said, if you want to go to Troy State College, we will support you. You may have to sue the state of Alabama. You may have to sue Troy State. But we're prepared to help you. Go back home and have a discussion with your mother, your father. Your home could be bombed. That's what he said. Your home could be burned.
Yeah, I got trees. Yeah, I got plants.
You could be beaten.
You know what I'm saying?
You could be harmed. And I went back and had a discussion with my mother and my father. They were so afraid that something could happen to me, that could happen to them, and we could lose the land, lose the farm. So they didn't want to have anything to do with my attempting to enroll at the school.
When you are that age, you don't feel powerful. I remember realizing that with what we were doing, trying to abolish segregation, we were coming up against governors of southern states, judges, politicians, businessmen. And I remember thinking, I'm only 22 years old.
It's a revolutionary act.
What am I doing? And I felt
God bless y'all.
So when we felt, when we heard,
Every last one of you, even if you're not violent. What? That's not the approach I would take. Because you gotta defend yourself, man, by any means.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was enacted by
History
the
shows,
U.S. Congress and then signed into law by then President Johnson on July 2nd, 1964.
Heart.
This bill was said to have
Purple
been one
heart.
of the weakest links in the power structure for equal rights concerning voter registration requirements, employment discrimination, and segregation in schools and other public places. In reaction to this Civil Rights Act bill, and with the loss to the Democrat Party preventing a new Democratic desegregated party from being accepted by the Democratic National Convention. From March 7th, 1965 to March 25th, 1965, 3 organizations decided to conduct a protest demonstration to draw awareness towards so-called Negroes wanting to exercise their constitutional right to vote. It was called the March from Selma to Montgomery. During this said march that lasted a total of 18 days, the 3 organizations that conducted and participated in this march were members of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Dallas County Voters League, along with members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But during the second to the last day of the march, on March 23rd, 1965, a few SNCC members like Stokely Carmichael and Willie Ricks, for example, chose to abandon the march from Selma to Montgomery upon reaching Lowndes County, Alabama, speaking to the local residents of the town, and then orchestrating a meeting with a member of the organization called the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights by the name of John Hewlett, who was also a former member of the NAACP subdivision in Alabama. Stokely Carmichael, John Hewlett, William Ricks, and other SNCC members created a brand new independent political party known as the Black Panther Party in March of 1965, not to be confused with Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale's Black Panther Party that was adopted a year or 2 later by SNCC. This initial Black Panther Party was officially known as the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, or the LCFO for short. So, during the James Meredith precedent, Stokely Carmichael and William Ricks and other members of SNCC and the Black Panther Party were met face to face with the golden opportunity of a lifetime, which was to be able to finally flip the narrative from Dr. King's nonviolent approach with Freedom Now to Stokely Carmichael's borrowed slogan, Black Power. While James Meredith was in the hospital, Stokely Carmichael met with Martin Luther King Jr., Floyd McKissick, and others, where they vowed to continue Meredith's march. And so the one-man march then became the March Against Fear. Having gained the media attention by aligning himself with Dr. King publicly during the march, just 10 days after the James Meredith precedent, on June 16, 1966, Stokely Carmichael purposely got himself arrested by police for trespassing on private property of the university. It was said that after immediately upon being released from police custody hours later, Stokely was instructed by William Ricks to give his Black Power speech in front of young students and the press in Greenwood, Mississippi, where he was quoted stating the following: "This is the 27th time I have been arrested, and I ain't going to jail no more. The only way we gonna stop them white men from whooping us is to take over. What we gotta start saying now is Black Power."
To use the term Black Power, SNCC had already decided this before the march. It must be properly understood. We decided to use the march for education purpose. Number one, we wanted to push strongly our struggle against the war in Vietnam. So if people look clearly at the Meredith March, you will see anti-Vietnam popping up here. King wasn't using it then, but you will see it's one of the areas where we started to hit him with it seriously. Our march was to put strong nationalism in, to have direct leadership from us, and of course to throw our Black Power for the masses of people. Now, I myself have been in Greenwood, Mississippi since early '60. I've worked in the project there, and when I head of the second congressional district, this was our base. So I spent time in the jail in Greenwood so many times. The police knew me, the police chief knew me, everyone in the town knew me. So we decided Greenwood, it was SNCC's strongest base in the Delta. We couldn't go wrong. Unfortunately for the police, we went to set up some tents there, and the police decided to arrest me. Okay, so before I was arrested, we were discussing Greenwood. This is where we will launch Black Power. So when I got arrested, Rick's was on the side there when the police said, let them arrest you. We'll get you out of jail and you come out and make a speech tonight. And he disappeared. Well, you know how Rick speaks. So anyway, I went to jail. But I was brought out, and when I was released, it was at night. The speech was going on. And when I came to the speech, I was in line. Rick came back. He said, we have everything prepared. We're ready for Black Power. We've spoke about it all day. We've primed up the people. And luckily for us, our biggest problem was Martin Luther King. Because I knew that once Black Power was said, Martin Luther King would have to come, not fight against it, but with his best try to give reasonings to water it down. But luckily for us, the night in Greenwood, King had to go to do a taped television thing, I think, for Meet the Press. So he had to go to Memphis. So he was not there the night in Greenwood. Rick said, everybody primed. He said, just get to your speech. We're going against freedom now. We're going for Black Power. Don't hit too much on freedom now, but hit the need for power. So we built up on the need for power. And just when I got there, before I got it, Rick was there saying, hit him now, hit him now. And I kept saying, give me time, give me time. When we finally got it, we dropped it, Black Power. Of course, they had been primed, and they responded immediately. But I myself, to be honest, I didn't expect that enthusiastic response, you know? And the enthusiastic response obviously not only shocked me, but gave me more energy to carry it on further. By the time we got down that night, SCLC was running around everywhere. We knew it was finished. We had made our victory. They could not bring it back. It was over.
Many people were opposed to Stokely's motives and agendas, calling him radical and militant. In fact, SNCC itself was established under the principles of nonviolence by so-called blacks and so-called whites. And that fact becomes quite obvious when taking a look at SNCC's logo alone. But once Stokely gained control over SNCC as the chairman, the once Jamaican immigrant that lived amongst the whites during his childhood,
Trinidadian,
purging all of SNCC's non-colored members one by one.
The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had been on the front line, the shock troops of the civil rights movement.
See, he messed up. He said he's talking from a
Young white and black students, north and south. Stokely Carmichael gets control of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating
uninformed position, but he has a little bit of information.
He purges the organization of all white people, all white leaders, given how dedicated you were. If you were white and you were the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee when Stokely Carmichael came in, he said, you go back and work in your community. We want to have total control, Black Power. That was a very destructive move. And it had consequences and ripples throughout the movement.
Stokely set out to raise awareness of wanting so-called Black Power by appearing in various meetings where the press were present and by soliciting door-to-door, enticing the poor people residing in Mississippi to go register and vote.
How you doing, Ms. Dunn? How do you think about it? Good. I want to talk to you a little about May 3rd. We're going to do it. So Logan, who's running against Mr. Favors and Sherry, we'll pick one of them. If we get one of those candidates picked, then on November 8th, their names will go on the ballot box and we'll vote on the list for Black Panther. So in November, do you know what we're going to do on May 3rd?
Oh, I think so.
What are we going to do on May 3rd?
We're going to try to get organized for the ready for November elections.
Now we can vote for our people because we have to use our vote to get out the cotton fields.
That's right.
We can't get out the cotton field voting for the boss, man. We got to vote for people who've been in the cotton fields like ourselves, and they're the ones who are going to bring us out of the cotton field. Because I guess you've been hearing what everybody's been saying about us across the country. You heard what they said? Now the law says that you can't vote in ours and also vote in the Democratic primary, which has to be held on the same day according to the law. So what we'll have to do is vote on one and not the other. So if you want to vote for our candidates for sheriff, for tax assessor, tax collector, coroner, and the school board, then you have to vote for us. If not, you can vote for governor and for the same people in the Democratic Party.
Being just a year older in age than Stokely Carmichael, SCLC's staff leader, Bernard Lafayette, shares a very important message concerning the term black itself and how many people were opposed to its usage amongst the so-called Negroes during that time period.
When I was growing up, to call a person of color, like myself or others, black, was considered derogatory. That's just a fact.
What kind of bullshit is that?
Because about black, those were fighting words.
What?
Those were fighting words.
So what was going on here was that the college students were manipulated by Stokely Carmichael and many of his closest colleagues to believe that the use of the term black is highlighting their group of people by way of their skin complexions, inadvertently grouping themselves into a mental status structure that not only bears negative connotation, but more importantly, it also makes them null and void or non-existent when it comes to law of the American government.
I feel that while believing firmly that power is necessary, that it would be difficult for me to use the phrase black power because of the connotative meaning that it has for many people.
The majority of the people that were associated with campaigning black power to these students did not relate to any struggles with poverty.
You should have kept it. The whole thing is
personally. So this exposes why someone needed to negate Dr. King's Freedom Now movement and transition the public's attention to a black power campaign, revealing that the campaign's method was politically used for the purpose to mentally and emotionally target only the Nijis of Turtle Island for self-degradation and self-condemnation, which makes things even deeper. Because we can now determine without a doubt that Stokely and his fellow colleagues were set to breach the Niji civil rights movement that was currently underway, steering the main attention away from unity, human rights, and nonviolence. I'm just here to make you think.
Well, I can tell y'all this right now. If he believes that, he's on crack. But what's really interesting is if Stokely is such a bad guy, then he wouldn't.
And structures and everything. Whoever owns that.
If Stokely was such a bad guy, right? He wouldn't have had the power to get things done. The Black Panther Party wouldn't have came out. You know what I'm saying? I mean, all these things wouldn't have manifested into what it needs to be, you know? Because now that we think about it, we really see it. You're like, we all want to be non-violent to get your freedom, but man, all the wars that you see and everything, the people that got their freedom just wave the right white flag and say, well, we want to. No, they didn't do that. They fought back. You win some, you lose some. But you live. You live to fight another day. You know? But that's what basically makes this whole situation kind of puzzling, you know, because on one hand, Stokely Carmichael it is kind of divisive, preaching black power over justice. But at the same time, it's kind of weak, preaching nonviolence over self-defense. So we gotta look at both sides, both spectrums, both sides of the equation. Yeah. Once we get that in order, then we'll be on top of our game. You know what I'm talking about? Because right now, as we see it, if we have no agenda, then we ain't gonna get nothing out of it. We have to have our own agenda as a black folk. You know what I'm saying? Throughout the whole world to counter the system of white supremacy. Because if we ain't looking out for each other, who will? And we have the ability to teach our children the right way, not the white way. You know what I'm saying? Gains and capital. You know? Let's just move forward for the better. Let's see where we can take this thing. It's your boy Bant Mizzo. I'm out this piece.